Okay, so I'm sitting down here with Natasha Wells, who is the author of Icarus, Book One in the Genome Chronicles, which I have read and reviewed. So this should be a very interesting conversation. And that is a book that drops today on September 1st, as I see it, the official start of fall, even though it's probably not. So how does it feel to officially be launching a book?
Surreal. It's super surreal. All of the hard work that goes into it, I can officially say I'm a published author. Feels pretty good.
Yes, yes, you sure can. So like I said, I have read the book. Just for people who maybe don't know about it, how would you describe it? What's your elevator pitch for the book?
Ooh, elevator pitch. Okay, so I'll try to keep it short. But the basic idea is my main character, Kara, has gone through a lot of trauma in her life, and she meets a scientist whose basic genetic research believes that trauma imprints on your DNA in a way that will fundamentally change you. And so he offers her the opportunity to join in a research program, and she accepts, and then she wakes up in the future. So she begins exploring why she was even selected. Of course, she has amnesia, like every good sci-fi book. And so she's trying to kind of find her way, and she meets this crew on the Icarus, which is a ship. And yeah, it kind of takes off from there. And that all happens like in the first three chapters, so it gets going pretty quickly.
Yeah, no, it sure does. In fact, when I was reading it, I think I actually commented to you personally when I started reading that I found the pacing to be really good. So
That
it
made
it,
me feel
gra it
good to
grabs you
know.
really fast. Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
first chapter, kind of present day, you kind of
Mm-hmm.
understand what's going on, and then there's this mystery that you build up right at.
Mm-hmm.
I want to say it's either. I want to say it's chapter three or chapter four, where you just dive in 700 years in the future. And
Yep.
for basically the majority of the book, you really don't know what's going on because our main character, Kara, she has amnesia. And
Mm-hmm.
it's what I found to be really interesting about it too is that I didn't really know all that much about the book going into it, which is
Right.
which is how I like to read, right?
Yeah.
But there does seem to be this major theme of trauma in sort of how
Yep.
it shapes us as human beings. And
Yep.
there's a lot of other heavy themes too, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
government overreach, bodily autonomy.
Yes.
So what would you like people to take away from this book going into it?
Well, I don't want to get too political, but I think it's important for it was two sides of a coin for me. One, I think we need to be involved in our society and what's happening. We're not really that far off from being able to modify our DNA in ways that you kind of see show up in this book. And I'm like a Black Mirror crazy person when I start thinking about some of this stuff. And I think it's important
Same.
that we as society, right, kind of pay attention to what's going on around us. And I won't assume how old you are. I'm a millennial. I was born in the early 80s. And I think many of us now at my age group are kind of going, man, it mental health thankfully is not this big stigma as much as it used to be, and we're much more open to talking about the experiences that we have and how important it is foundationally for us to get the help that we need to also then break those generational cycles for our kids, right? And becoming a parent was a big infusion of that to make sure that I like was doing as good of a job as I could for my kid and his future. So
Mhm. Yeah, I totally got that. And you say you didn't want to be too political in your
a
answer, but I actually did see this as sort of an overtly political book.
little bit.
It's very obvious where you stand on a lot of issues, which
Hmm.
honestly I don't even consider them political issues. They're more so human
Human.
rights issues.
That's right.
So
Yeah.
I remember we were going back and forth on Instagram, and
Hmm.
I noticed you were posting a lot of stories related to outer space, and I'm like, okay,
Hmm.
this is a writer that prefers to write things in the future in outer
Mm.
space. And
Hmm.
so what draws you in about that? Do you enjoy sort of taking like a retrospective look 700 years in
Mm.
the future as to, our current state right now and then
Hmm.
commenting on that?
So when I decided to write, I really hadn't planned on becoming like this future sci-fi writer. I did feel like when you're looking at sort of romance subgenres, there's not as much of this as I personally would like to see. I would read more of this if it was out there. Maybe I'm just not looking on the right place on Amazon, but I wanted to write something that I felt like was missing in this space. I mean, if you want billionaire romance, it's out there, but that wasn't like I'm not contemporary all the time. I mean, I wanted to escape a little bit, but I also felt like there's a lot of people that are writing high fantasy, which I also really enjoy. I have a Lord of the Rings tattoo. I'm super into that style of writing in those books, but it's also a very saturated market right now. And I was like, I want to do something a little bit different that I feel like would be refreshing for me. But it's also nice to just escape, like as a writer, into something that's not super contemporary because like we have enough going on in our personal lives. I don't want to write about what's going on right now, although supposedly aliens are real. So, maybe it's not as far fetched as I would like to believe.
Honestly, I already knew, I mean,
I think we all knew.
yeah. So I'm glad you mentioned the romance aspect of that because
Mm,
I haven't touched on it at all. I was not prepared for how spicy this book is
sorry.
because
Warning.
I've not read a lot of romance.
Mm,
My wife has recommended books to me before, which I do
sure.
read, and I
Yeah.
enjoy them on a certain
Yep.
level. But what I enjoyed about the book quite a bit is how it seems to balance what I call, military action. And I know
Mm,
you have sort of a background that you're drawing on for
mm-hmm.
that.
Mm-hmm.
And the sci-fi elements and the romance. So when you were putting this together, how did you
Mm,
decide how to balance all of those elements so that it
yeah.
kept up with the pacing?
Well, when I first started doing the beta draft read throughs with some people that I knew, quite a few of them were military or military spouses, so they kind of had that background, like just people that when I announced, they were like, "I would love to beta read for you," and so even they were, I'll call them a couple of the civilians that were reading it were like, "You're using a lot of military acronyms," so I had to actually pull back a little bit on some of the military pieces, but it was good to make sure that I had kind of a diverse group of people beta reading because you might not catch that. Sometimes you're so submersed in your own world that you can go too heavy in one direction or another. So definitely for people who are interested in self-publishing and you're not having an agent or somebody work to get that editor for you, make sure that the people that are reading through your stuff is a diverse group, because if you kind of put everybody, like if everybody had been military, even though a couple of them were like, you should probably spell out senior airman instead of using the acronym, right? And I'm like, oh yeah, of course. But because for 21 years, I always abbreviated it, I never write out senior airman, right? Like you just don't write like that. So that was an important piece, making sure I had a diverse group to help me catch some of that and change my thought process up. But then also really wanting to make sure I had a solid plot. Like, yes, there's romance, but and I don't know if you kind of caught this at the end, like, and I won't spoil it, but she is very in love with this colonel, and you see their journey together. But at the end, she does kind of go, I'm interested to see where this goes, whether he's with me or not. Like, you don't really know like what the next step of their future is going to be like, but she is, and she would be sad if things didn't work out between them, but she is also in this place where she's like, I'm finally getting to live a life that I am really, really happy with. And it's a happy ending, but at the same time, I'm not going to put this person in a box where it's like her life doesn't exist if she doesn't have a romantic interest either. So the romance was super important, but I wanted a plot line that was really, really critical for me because there's a lot of really light, fluffy romance books, but that's not this. So,
Yeah, well, one of the things I wrote in my review of it after I read it was that not not being a very experienced romance reader, one thing I appreciated is that there aren't just sexy scenes just to be there to be sexy scenes,
yeah,
right? One thing I
yeah,
really appreciated about it is that we're dealing with someone who has never really had much sexual pleasure in her life, and it's sort of a
yes.
journey of her sort of understanding that that can be
Mm-hmm.
a very positive thing. Like it doesn't have to be transactional. She
That's
falls
right.
in love with someone. Sorry for spoilers, but there is a romance. And she actually learns to enjoy sex and sensuality, and I think
Yep.
that's a really great theme of it
It was
too.
important. Yeah, that was absolutely important. I mean, again, I won't make any spoilers, but she has to come to her own sexual awakening before she can even really get to that place with him. And that's important for femininity, however you pronounce that entire word. I really think that that's what romance in general is trying to do for a lot of women. This is not your grandmother's romance, and a lot of romance today is really, I think, helping to empower women and men, right? Like I think it's a place where it's like trying to understand that it doesn't just have to be this transactional thing. So I'm glad that that came through. Good
Oh
job,
yeah,
me.
yeah, I appreciated it. So one thing I always like to think about whenever I'm reading a book is where the author places themselves within the characters. So as you were writing the characters, was there one particular character that you felt, oh, this represents me, Natasha, or
Mm-hmm.
was it aspects of multiple characters where you were like, okay, people are kind of getting a view of my life through this person or
Mm-hmm.
multiple people?
I would say I definitely called on experiences for my military pieces that I put into Kara's story that you actually get to experience. I'm glad to hear you mentioned about the pacing in the beginning. I'm glad to hear that you really felt like it was a good pace because there was like a lot of chapters in the beginning. I think I had 6 or 7 backstory chapters, and I cut that way, 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 way down because I was like, this is too much. But I did pour a lot of that history, and I think I kind of got carried away. So I tried to really trim that down. But I don't personally identify with Kara's personality as much as I do Duvall's, Noel, the lead sort of communication officer on the ship. I as I was writing her, I was very attached to the way that she deals with trauma and the way that she deals with this new person on the ship and the changes that are happening in the crew and her desire for like things to work exactly the way that she expects them to. Like every time she tries to get something to work right and she gets very frustrated and her crew is like, we'll get there, you'll be able to do it. Like I identified more with those emotions and those things that were coming through. So I'll be interested, should I write her book, to see how that comes through. Because as an author, you should really never write too much of yourself in one character, because if somebody hates that character, it'll be very bad for your self-esteem.
I get that.
I saw that. I saw more of that in her.
Yeah, so speaking of other books, this is
Mm,
going to be a series. You said
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
potentially 5 books. So are
That's the plan.
you going to do the thing that some authors do where you jump perspectives and it's this person's book now and we're following their journey. You talked about Duvall
Mm-hmm,
maybe doing something from their perspective. So
mm-hmm.
what are
That's
we planning on here without being too spoilery as to where the story goes?
Yeah, I don't think it'll be too spoilery. The second book is going to be Yi and Roth,
Mhm.
so I'm going to completely shift perspectives.
It's probably my
Um,
favorite character, by the way, is Yi.
yeah, she's
Yeah.
super cool, just no nonsense researcher. I'm very excited to write her backstory, and there's a lot of layers of her. So really, I'll have to dig in with you since you've read it and hear some of the things you liked and didn't like so that I can make
Yeah.
sure that I get that right in the next book. But I'm really excited to write their story together and where that will take the whole crew. And then I have a whole mural board planned out of what I want to see happen with each of the characters that come through. I've heard a lot of people. One thing I tried to be careful of was like head swapping or too many character swapping. So like there's a lot of books, especially in high fantasy, once you've introduced all these characters, you start switching perspectives a lot. So depending on how I make this come together, let's assume book 5, you've met all of these different characters. They kind of each get their own like story. In book 5, do I bring them all together and then we're constantly switching between different people's perspectives? That's kind of the way I anticipate it going, but who knows? And I don't know if that would be too complicated or too many characters, or if they'll all make it. I don't know. We'll see.
Okay. Well, shifting gears here a little bit because we know you are an independently published author, and
Mm,
it has been a long year of
hmm.
figuring out, both your writing process, your publishing
Yes,
process, getting all your
yes.
resources together. first question I have for you, since I myself am a parent and a writer and have a
Mm-hmm.
full-time job, which I know
Mm-hmm.
you check all those boxes.
Yes.
How do you split up your time between all of your responsibilities, your full-time work, your parenting, your writing, and of course social media, which when you're a writer, it's like another job all to
It
itself.
is. There's so much to the social media piece. So I would say you got to learn what is going to be the best use of your time. I don't necessarily do all things all days. I have an incredible spouse who I'm very grateful. I think he's finally beginning to understand because I don't know that he quite got this in the beginning, but he'd be like, "Hey, why don't you go write?" And I'm like, "Okay, you can't just spring that on me. Like as a creative, you have to kind of get in the mood, right?" And so I might be able to do something else. I might be able to like plan a couple TikTok videos or plan an outline, but you really have to kind of be prepared to sit down and write. And sometimes that's when the mood hits you and it's like 11 o'clock at night. And so just trying to balance all of that. I think as time has gone on this year, I've really taken a breath and said, my kid and my family is important. And I really have tried to be more intentional about spending time with them, even if that meant that other things were going to get delayed. Or, as much as I tried to make sure this was a very polished final product, there's probably going to be a couple of typos. So forgive me, lovely humans out there watching this. I certainly made sure that I was as perfect as I could be. But at the end of the day, if that meant that I'm going to go play Mario with my kid instead, I don't feel bad about that. Like it is what it is. And so, especially over the summer, as things have been, very crazy with kids out of school and stuff like that, we've just kind of had to make it work. But thankfully, now what my husband and I have started to do is we kind of just like schedule time in advance where he'll be like, "Hey, on Saturday, we take turns." He's like, "Would you be interested in going to the coffee shop for a couple hours and just trying to write? And then maybe on Sunday, I'll take kid duty for a couple hours so he can go golf." And that might seem like a small thing, but just being intentional with each other's time and making sure that you each have time with your kid and together as a family, like just trying to plan a little bit better. It doesn't always work out great, but trying.
Absolutely, yeah. I don't know if you're similar to me in this way, where I need to concentrate really hard for a very
Yes.
specific amount of time. And my
Mm-hmm.
wife says sometimes, "Hey, you get really mean when you write," but it's like that Christian Bale thing, right? Of like, "Hey, why'd you walk through the set while I was trying to act?"
Oh my gosh,
So
the worst.
yeah,
The worst.
it's just that kind of thing.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
so when you set out to do this, I know you had to do a lot of your own research and figure out a lot of
Mm.
things for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, your comment related to typos and whatnot, I actually kind of it's one thing I like about reading independently published work is sort of the rawness of it. It's kind of like
Mm-hmm.
you see a typo and you're like, oh, this person's human, like me. Which, by
Yep.
the way, again, people that are watching this, I have caught some pretty bad typos in traditionally published work. Okay, I know we all
It does
have, so
exist.
listen, no
Yes.
judgment. Okay,
Zero.
um, but were there any quote unquote mistakes that you feel like you
Mm.
made early on, either leading up to getting yourself at a good place to start getting it out to beta readers, or setting
Mm-hmm.
up your publishing process? Even, today on launch day, was there anything else that you would have done different that you're going to carry over into book two?
So into book two, I think is going to be a little bit different because once you get ready to launch book two, you're going to have different problems, right? Like I'm going to have to figure out how to make sure that when I launch book two, people have read book one. So I'm going to have kind of an interesting marketing strategy just for that. I would say I highly, highly underestimated the amount of editing that you will do. And the reason I say that, I knew there was going to be a lot of editing, but there's, so many different stages of editing, right? The developmental, the editing, like the line editing, like there's all kinds of editing. And I think when I was going in with my first draft, I really underestimated all of those stages. And I felt like my first draft needed to be so much more polished than like I kept editing it because I was like, oh, this needs to be a better first draft. Like embrace the process, right? There's all these different stages and places. And I probably just needed to be better educated on what that was going to look like. In the corporate world, I do a lot of, like typey type work, right? Like I'm a desk jockey in terms of like the type of work that I do. I'm a very IT techie person, but I don't necessarily have to make sure that it's quite so polished because it's shorter. And so 90,000 words is a lot to try and wrap your arms around. Book
It's
two,
too
I think
much
I will,
to edit
it's
yourself, I would say.
so much. You can't do it alone. So trust the process, right? Get it in a good stage where you feel really confident that your beta readers will get what you're trying to do, take all their feedback, incorporate all of that, make your developmental edits, really give it time to breathe, hire an editor. Like I did hire an editor, but I still went back and made big developmental changes after that. And then I was catching a lot of typos. So it wasn't necessarily my editor's fault. I changed things that I probably should have changed in the beginning. So make sure that you have a plan with that. Like you can be a pantser all you want, but have a plan for how you're going to get things developed and edited because it's just more work for you in the end, which is okay. It's fun. It's a part of the process. And I enjoyed every stage of it. But I'm glad to be writing again because it's a much different mind when you're thinking about proofreading versus writing a draft. And it really is different hats and a totally different vibe and feeling.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, so what are some of the resources that you have used as a independently published author that you would
Mm.
recommend for other people who want to go and publish their own work?
Don't underestimate the value of Facebook. I wasn't even planning on creating a Facebook. That, from a social media marketing perspective, I'll just say that Facebook and newsletters were two things that I'd kind of written off as being old school. It is still
Mhm.
very much alive and well. You can certainly start building up your community. And I would actually highly recommend if you're planning on writing, go ahead and start that social media experience now. Start publishing the behind the scenes. You don't have to wait like a couple weeks before launch, and you probably shouldn't if you are going to be doing your own publishing. Um, from a craft perspective, I ended up purchasing Icarus. I don't know if you've ever heard of them as a
I've heard of
tool,
them.
but
Yeah.
yeah, so I got this most recent year's Icarus, and you actually, when you pay for it, I can't remember how much it is. It's several $100s, maybe like $200, $300, but you get access to that material for 6 years. So kind of a good amount of time. And they have a ton of different videos on how to write, how to think like a screenplayer, like screenplay writing, what you can learn from the movies, how to do social media, why you should have a TikTok. Very well worth the investment. And also look into, I wrote it down because I was not going to be able to remember the name of it, My Indie Bookshelf. So they're trying to create this platform for indie authors, which I really loved. Check that out. I think that could be worth it. Even if you love to read indie, support indie, great place to find other indie authors and connect.
hmm And before we started recording, we were talking about ISBNs, whether you should do free or purchase
Yeah.
ISBNs.
Yeah.
Since you mentioned, things like Indie Bookshelf, I do know that there are some outlets that do like to actually stock physical copies,
Hmm.
even if they're an online store of
Yep.
independently published books. But it seems to be a lot of times contingent on having a purchased ISBN that you
Yeah.
own. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just to recap our conversation that we didn't record, what did you decide to do with your ISBNs? Did you
So
purchase
I
them or get free ones?
Yes, so I did both, and I'm not sure I did it well. I have to go back and double check everything that I did. My Barnes and Noble and Amazon print has an ISBN, and then I tried to use that ISBN across Ingram Spark, which is, a big aggregator and distributor of print books, but it wouldn't accept my ISBN. So I was under the impression you could use that ISBN across every format, across all the platforms, but I probably didn't either do something right, or maybe you can't do it that way. Ingram Spark ended up giving me their own free print ISBN, but now I need to go back and do a little bit of research. I do think it's worth the investment because, like you said, there's places where you do have to buy them. So just make sure that you are spending your dollars wisely. Maybe I put it in the wrong place because obviously nobody's stocking an Amazon book. So maybe I put it in the wrong place. But,
Mhm.
I mean, none of these things are super permanent. Worst case scenario, you take that book down, you use an ISBN, and like you can't use it again, but you can do some things, I think, to kind of, I don't know. We'll see how badly I screwed up with that. Interview me on book two, and we'll we'll
Yeah,
see if I made a mistake.
I'm imagining going into an independent bookstore saying, "Hey, can you carry some physical copies of this? You can only get it on Amazon." And they're like, "Well, Amazon's trying to put us out of business, so absolutely not."
And that is their
Um,
answer. I've actually talked to a couple local bookstores and they're like, get it on Ingram Spark and we'll talk. And I'm like, okay, so that's what I'm trying to do right now.
Okay, which again you can do as sort of the owner of this copyright, that's another benefit of being a self-published author, right? Is that you own the
Mm-hmm.
copyright, even if you own the ISBNs, even better.
Right.
But you
Yep.
mentioned the cost of the ISBNs,
Yeah.
and using your money wisely. What would
Yes.
you say people need to pay the most attention to in terms of costs? And is there anything you regret paying for in the process that if you would go back, you would say,
Mm.
hey, maybe I didn't need to pay for that?
So far, I felt like I'm the kind of person where like I generally buy all the things and I do a really bad job of money management because I'm like, I'll use my credit card for that. Don't do that. But this time I've tried to be very judicious with how I've spent my money. So, for example, I don't have a website yet, which is kind of weird, I think, in this day and age. But I said, I only have one book. And yeah, maybe you want to go to my website to learn more about me, but there's other ways that you can do that. And while, yes, you can make free websites, I wanted the custom domain. I wanted to do it right. And I would rather, what ROI am I getting for that? Right. And I think that's what every new author needs to ask themselves. If I spend this money, how is this going to get money for me in return? If you're going to spend money on an ISBN, what is your strategy to use that ISBN so it is actually going to make you money? I am spending money on Facebook ads. I am spending money on Amazon ads, and it is returning an investment on sales for me. So do your research, make sure you know how to do those things before you just jump in. But I feel like so far I've tried to research everything that I've done so far. I did spend money on this tool. Oh gosh, I can't even remember what it's called now. I will look it up, but it's one of those like AI type of tools where you can like see what the search results are. It's like we the people or we the public or answer the public. Oh gosh, I can't even think of you can like pop it up. I'll send it to you. But
Okay.
it's one of those tools where it's like you can see what's trending from a search perspective. And
Okay.
I thought that that was going to give me some really robust SEO,
Mhm.
keyword type of tools. And while it was a lifetime cost of just $100, so far that hasn't done anything for me yet. Not to say it was a bad purchase, but I probably didn't need to buy it right then. It was something flashy that came up on TikTok, and I was like, I want that. So just make sure that you don't get caught up in something that's trendy or cool just because you're, anyway, spend money on a good editor, a good cover artist. Like make sure that you're spending money on things that are really important to you and your brand, and that's going to return the ROI back to you.
For sure. And on that note, what would success look like to you for this first book?
Hmm. I'm already super happy, right? With where my
Great.
numbers were when I launched. I'm really super pleased. I know that I got both people that love and adore me that spent money to buy my book. Like I couldn't even be more thankful for the people who've supported me and just doing the journey. I mean, my husband and I sat down and talked about it because I was like, because he asked me the similar question, like, what does success look like? Like, are you imagining a target number? And I was like, I wrote the book. Like, to me, that is what I set out to do. I felt like I created a really great book that I'm proud of. And people actually bought it. So, now I'm just trying to learn how to make it as profitable as I possibly can because why not? And spending those dollars in a way that's going to continue to return on the investment. But I'm excited to do book two. And really, I think at this point, success will just look like, am I able to continue to build a community of people who love the characters that I wrote? You were like, yeah, use my favorite character. That makes me happy to hear because that's the whole point of an author is like you want people to love your story and love your characters and love the world that you built.
And that's one thing I've heard from a lot of independent authors is developing a series is crucial to getting
Yeah.
back because many, many times they say you will sort of lose money, so to speak, on the first
Mm-hmm.
book, but as you keep gaining readers by,
Yeah.
the third, fourth, fifth book, you will have made up your cost essentially.
Yeah,
Um,
for sure.
so yeah, no, that's awesome. And I would say that Yeah, I mean, so far you're doing all the right stuff. I've actually used some of your concepts for
Ooh,
my eventual publication. So you've been very, very educational for me.
yay!
I don't know if you've had this experience, but when you tell people that you're going to put your work out there and you're going to put up all the costs and all that stuff, some people might say, "Oh, but what if you don't sell any copies, right?"
Mm-hmm.
To which I usually reply, you could be traditionally published and not sell any copies. It's all
True.
about selling yourself.
Yes.
People, I assume you're looking into like setting up booths at conferences and whatnot and actually getting in front
Mm-hmm.
of people. But what I've seen is that the authors that sell the most copies, they talk to people in person, people that go like, oh, this is interesting. They may not even read the book, right? But they buy it because it looks interesting and you sell it well,
Sure.
right?
Yep.
So
Yeah. My dad's never going to read it, but he's going to buy a copy. That's okay too.
yeah, I think it's a good idea that your dad never reads it.
See, I'll
You
send
know,
him this.
as I was reading it, I was going like, oh, I feel like I'm getting away with something. Yeah. No. So just to wrap things up here because we're getting close to time. If you were to describe this using some other TV shows, movies, books, other properties that would
Mm-hmm.
really help people understand the tone that you're trying to build here,
Mm-hmm.
how would you describe it?
So we're kind of going for a Lost in Space sort of vibe, maybe a little bit of Star Trek, but not afraid to dip into a little Black Mirror territory. We're probably getting into a lot of subgenres there. It's a little bit lighter than Black Mirror, but love this concept of moving forward in time, and they're kind of out there on their own. There's a new show actually that my husband's been watching that I'm actually going to go back and probably watch called
Mhm.
Foundation. That is a show that like I have my headphones in and he's watching it and I kind of keep seeing it pop up and whatever that main
I,
character's
I think
name
you'd
is.
like it. Yeah,
He's super
based on what
dreamy.
I know about your
Yeah.
your
Yeah,
preferences.
so
Yeah.
you can kind of get the vibe, right? So it's a little bit of this DNA is very important and humanity and tyrannical governments and all of that kind of theme. I was like, oh, that feels relatable. So a little bit of all those, but then you're throwing in a pretty heavy military romance on top of that, which you can't quite think of any shows where I've seen that's maybe super heavy romance. Stargate, maybe? I don't know.
No, I mean, hey, well, I told you I'm kind of a novice when it comes to romance, but it
Yeah,
was it was unlike anything I've ever read, that's for
yeah,
sure. I remember the first time we met, you said there needs to be more sci-fi written by women.
yeah.
Have you been able to find any books, any sci-fi books written by women that you've enjoyed recently?
Not sci-fi romance. There are several authors that I've come across recently that I'll just pull up my Kindle. I don't think there's any romance in the theme. I was like, oh, okay, that's totally fine, right? There's all different types of sci-fi out there. Let me look at that. But they're out there. I think the romance piece of it is what's so interesting to me. The Last Watch, which is, oh gosh, I can't see her name on here. Lindsay Baroker, it writes a bunch of books as well. She was one of the ones that I came across first. Lindsay Baroker, she's got a lot of really good sci-fi that's out there. And then this was a newer author that I came across, The Last Watch, which I can't see what her title, what her J.S. Dawes. So those were two that I kind of came across when I was initially doing my research. Again, I really didn't find a whole lot when I started on this journey. So they're probably out there. And the more I kind of learn and read and research, Anna Hackett is one of the authors that got me into military romance. She does a really good job with a lot of series, really long military romance series that I would say it's more on the pendulum of real romance and less on the sci-fi. So I would be interested to hear that if I'm assuming you're posting this on YouTube, right? So put it in the
Yeah,
comments. Ask your listeners. I don't know.
we'll
I
see.
I
We'll
need more
see.
in my life.
Well, I mean, I do think it's good to have a niche, right? Because I,
Yeah,
I feel like a lot of people are compelled to write because they don't see something and they want it out in the world, right? So
that's right.
so yeah. So you wrote what you wanted
First,
to see.
just kidding.
Awesome. Well, Natasha, I am really looking forward to the second book. What do you think the timeline is going to be like for that?
I've started writing book two, so we'll see how much free time, downtime I get. I would really love to try to do book two and three back to back. I would love to see if I can write both of these books by the end of the year. I don't know. That's way too aggressive, but I don't know. We'll see.
Okay. Yeah. Hey, if you can fit that in with your busy schedule, I will be very impressed. So,
Me too.
all right. Well, great. I guess we'll wrap that up there. Really enjoyed the conversation. So,
Thanks.
yeah, we'll be talking soon.
That sounds great. It's good to catch up with you. Let me know. We'll go get a beer, hang out, and actually talk shop and get into some writing stuff.
We'll
It'd be
do.
fun.
We'll do.